All right, so as I mentioned, this is all about the entrepreneur ecosystem and particularly my work around supporting rural communities in building up their entrepreneurship ecosystem. What are the assets? What are the gaps? How can we build strategies that create a really thriving and inclusive and robust entrepreneur ecosystem? So Mark mentioned yesterday, but just as a recap, who we are, the Center on Rural Innovation is a national nonprofit that believes that small towns can be homes to big ideas, and new models of economic development can be used to empower rural communities across the United States so that they can benefit from our nation's growing, thriving tech economy. And why we exist ultimately is because we want to advance this inclusive rural prosperity. We want to see more rural folks step into technology and entrepreneurship opportunities and ensure that they, as much of what was said yesterday, don't have to leave their home, or they can go back to their home and find an incredible job opportunity and know that that is possible where they are. They don't have to go to a big city or the nearest metro. So that's why we exist. We want to create these tech ecosystems that can support tech entrepreneurship and tech jobs. And the why of this is certainly no surprise to y'all as residents of rural places in our country, but ultimately the sad reality is that rural America actually never really recovered in terms of job growth after the 2008 Great Recession. And then COVID further really widened the gap between rural places and urban places in terms of job growth and job opportunity. And so we are currently facing the largest opportunity gap ever seen before between urban and rural. And we obviously want to close this gap because when we look at the data, we see that there's a large percentage of folks in rural America. The total workforce right there is 12%, but our share of the tech workforce in rural is only 5%. So we want to see rural folks, 12% of the population, have 12% at least of the tech jobs. So we're truly reflected and represented in these incredible opportunities. So that's our goal by 2030, 12% of our nation's tech economy jobs distributed to match the gender and race demographics of each region. Between 2014 and 2019, and this is really the why, that 96% of new tech jobs were created in metro areas, so leaving 4% for us. Sure, go ahead.
I had kind of a tedious question. They were talking about ag tech yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Does that fall into tech jobs or ag jobs?
That would fall into tech jobs for us. I mean, the folks in ag probably also consider it an ag job, but for us, if it's using a technology, service, or product as really core or central to what the product is accomplishing, it is tech, and we would consider it tech. That's a great question, though, because while we want to support ag tech and other kinds of technologies like manufacturing tech that might be more common to rural America, we also want to sort of debunk this widespread myth that it's only ag tech that can happen in rural America. Ag tech is awesome, and there are people creating software in rural America. There are people creating biotechnology. So we want to really help folks see that, yes, rural is home to incredible ag tech and advanced manufacturing and other kinds of historical industries that have been dominant in rural, but that's not the only kind of tech and innovation that can happen there. So we focus a lot on scalable software tech startups and how folks could step into those kinds of roles. But great question, and I love that you asked that. So if others, hey y'all, want to ask a question or comment on anything, because it is kind of a small group, I would be super open to that. If you just joined us, I'm Molly Pyle. I lead our entrepreneurship work at the Center on Rural Innovation, a national nonprofit really dedicated to closing the gap between where we are right now as rural Americans and where we want to be in terms of representation in the tech workforce. And the other thing is talking about tech startups. Right now, only 2.5% of venture capital goes to companies in rural zip codes. And we obviously know that there's much more innovation that's investable that's happening in rural America. It's just not yet caught the attention of most venture capital investors, though that number is growing. So how did this happen when we think about why are we in the state that we're in terms of the rural opportunity gap? We think about three core drivers. There's automation, the rapid acceleration of technologies and jobs being automated, particularly some of those that have been more historically rural in nature, such as agriculture and manufacturing type of jobs and services. There's globalization. We've all seen some jobs go offshore or even just to a larger city and being outsourced to places where they believe there's more tech talent or they can find that labor at a lower cost. And then there's this decline in entrepreneurship that has been happening for decades now. You would think that entrepreneurship has been growing in the United States, but we've actually seen a decline, particularly in rural areas. In 1977, 2 out of 10 US startups were in rural areas, and now today it's just 1 out of 10. So that share has been falling, and we want to see that boost back up, and even ideally be more than 2. And again, why is this going on really? What is causing this lack of technology startups being based in rural places? It's because rural America has often faced challenges in keeping up with or even catching any share of the innovation economy. It grew 3.5 times faster than the overall economy from 2005 to 2019. And again, 96% of those jobs have been created in just these 5 dark blue metro areas. So just 5 major places keeping 96% of these tech and innovation jobs. I have a big problem with that. I don't know about you all, but I actually got my start in the tech startup world working in Silicon Valley. I'm from a small town in Florida, and I said, I can't see a future here, so as soon as I graduated, I got out of there. And then I realized a couple years later that I really missed my family, I really missed the small town. I was in Silicon Valley, I was managing tech startup incubators and accelerator programs, and I was really blown away by the innovation process, right? That people were coming with really big, wild ideas, and that through this really formal kind of method of testing and iterating and customer discovery and product development, that people were actually bringing these ideas to life. I was seeing folks in the accelerator actually get funding and start to hire people and bring their products to market, and I was just blown away by that process. But I couldn't help but think that it was really unequally distributed, right? Why do people in Silicon Valley get this opportunity to learn and tinker with their idea and scale it, but nobody in my hometown, nobody else I knew in a small town, had ever heard of anything like an accelerator or ever thought that they could turn a tech idea or some sort of crazy big solution into a real thing in the market? So it felt like there was unequal distribution of this incredible opportunity that I was starting to understand tech entrepreneurship was. That's what brought me to working for the Center on Rural Innovation. It was this organization that I had been following for a while and realized they were really expanding into trying to build these tech startup ecosystems in rural places, partnering with rural leaders and helping them figure out what are the resources and programs and connections that I need to offer so that I can actually start to bring a startup economy to our small town. How do I do that? What does that look like? And so that's how I got into this work, is I'm very passionate about seeing a map like this look completely different at the end of my lifetime, I hope. And this is also something to think about when we think about the demographics of rural America. It's a commonly held misconception that rural America is just a monolith of white people, right? There's way more people of all different backgrounds that live in rural America. And this challenge is even greater. The opportunity gap is even more pronounced for the rural Black population. Employment rate is 30% lower than that of the metro Black population in rural areas, and per capita income is 50% lower. And nearly 50% of the rural Black population lives in persistent poverty, compared to 12% of the rural white population and 9% of the metro Black population. So we feel really strongly about thinking about the unique demographics of every rural community that we work with. We have this little joke. We say, once you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. They're all different, right? You've seen one that is not applicable or transferable information across the whole country. Every place looks different and has different needs in terms of their residents. And you all know that. I'm really preaching to the choir here. So continuing on, why are we really passionate about this? It's just the numbers speak for themselves in terms of tech jobs and the opportunities there that they create in terms of wealth. Software engineering, at the low end, over $100,000. Web development, data science, IT specialist, cybersecurity, database. These are the kinds of tech jobs that we're talking about when we say, we know that rural folks can get the training, get the opportunities, and thrive in these kinds of jobs, and bring home all of those salaries and circulate it back into their local economy to really help things grow and thrive and become, closer to closing that opportunity gap. And this is is, again, because of what we've seen across the board, the tech economy growing 4.3 times faster than the overall economy, and in 2017 comprised 6.9% of our GDP. So we know that this is really key, or we believe this is key to solving that crisis of disparity between incomes and opportunity in rural and urban. It's also really interesting why I'm so all in on startups is because when you look at venture-backed companies or companies that get investment in order to scale and grow, they see employment growth an average of 8 times higher than a typical private company, producing more tech jobs. So our philosophy is that if you can help folks create tech startups, they are ultimately going to create more jobs, local jobs, a diversified economy, than just trying to attract a big fish, right? A traditional economic development strategy of bringing an industry or bringing in an employer. Instead, you can create more jobs, so it's very difficult to start that startup economy, but creating that 8 times higher average than a typical private company in terms of job growth. And then the median annual wage, of course, for computer and information occupations, $88,000, which was higher than the median annual wage for all occupations of $39,000. So over 2x more in terms of salary that you can bring in tech. And so how do we do this? What does this look like in terms of supporting the real rural ecosystem builders, the people who are in the field, rolling up their sleeves, committed to doing this every day? Our organization, the Center on Rural Innovation, does a number of different things. I mentioned my colleague Mark yesterday presented on our research angle, what thought leadership sort of activities we do around remote work and the tech and innovation opportunities that are growing. So Mark manages our research and data. We also have a strategy development and grant writing support part of our organization where we will help rural leaders really identify what the opportunity is in terms of how they can grow their economy and what kind of grant funding they might need to do that. What is their strategy for this tech ecosystem? And how can they find the right kinds of funding to bring it to life? So we'll work with them side by side in identifying and applying for grants, really rolling up their sleeves and putting pen to paper. We will be those folks who will sit with you and say, I think you need to kind of tweak this section, and this part of the narrative isn't quite coming through. And that is actually a really rewarding part of the work, to see folks iterate on an idea and then submit it and then be awarded most of the time. And then we have a community of practice. It's called the Rural Innovation Network. I'll share a little more about that, but it is a group of 33 communities across the country and growing. And these are all rural leaders who are committed to building a tech economy through startups, through tech jobs, through innovation hubs. They work together. They often co-commiserate, right? This is really difficult work. And they share ideas. They share best practices. They share things they've tried. And it's just a really fantastic group of folks who we have worked with over the course of their time, maybe through strategy, through enabling them with research and data to make stronger arguments to their local or state kind of decision makers. And so that is the Rural Innovation Network. I'll get a little more into that. We also do national training and placements. So we will partner with Microsoft or Udacity or other kind of digital skilling organizations that want to see pilots happen in terms of some training programs. So what could it look like to offer folks a 12-week course in back-end engineering, for example? And then how does that fit into the larger needs in the landscape of the tech economy and what kind of jobs are available? So we'll try to match rural partners and communities with training providers that make sense for them if they may not already have them existing in the local higher ed institutions. I lead our entrepreneurship work. We have a mentor network. We also have a fund that invests in startups that are based in opportunity zones. And I, like I mentioned, come from this incubator accelerator background. I help folks think about how they want to design these programs. What needs to go in them? What doesn't need to go in them? What does this program structure look like? How do I really create a program that's going to benefit entrepreneurs? How do I meet people where they are in terms of the spectrum of growth from idea all the way to launch for their company? So like I mentioned, we do this really specific support around strategy development and grant writing. And through this work, we've helped rural communities raise more than $29.9 million in federal funding and matching dollars through the Economic Development Administration, or EDA's highly competitive Build to Scale Venture Challenge. Used to be called the I-6. Really interesting grant that I would strongly recommend anybody check out if you are interested in seeking funds to help build a startup economy. So this is $5 million. Half of that you raise and match, half of that is awarded through the EDA. And that has been a transformational grant that I have seen so many rural communities now win to build their accelerator, to build out their entrepreneurship programming, to really get the staffing, oftentimes, that they need who can run these kinds of programs. So incredible program. We're really happy with the most recent batch of communities that we worked with. All 6 of them that we worked with won this grant. And so how do they think about that? How do they make a competitive proposal? How do we really frame up what is the strategy? It's an ecosystem approach, right? It's not just, I'm gonna build it and they will come. It's thinking about what are all of the other pieces that I need to be thinking about so that a tech entrepreneur can thrive, can succeed. So if you're thinking about the sort of tech economy ecosystem, we start with what we call the sort of really important infrastructure all the way to the left. And that is broadband. Obviously, we know how critical that is. You can't really have remote work or a scalable tech startup in a place where there's not good internet. Local leadership and the capacity for them to take on new ideas. We know that, especially in rural places, folks wear 20 different hats and have to do everything from housing to the startup strategy to 50 things in between. And so can the local leadership find the capacity, find the buy-in, hopefully grow and get staff, and really be able to take this on in a sustainable way? And then co-working and entrepreneurship spaces. So how important is it for people to have a central gathering point? And I'll go into that a little more later on. But if you can kind of develop or have some of these 3 core foundational infrastructure pieces, then we believe the direct drivers of a tech economy ecosystem can start to take shape. And like I mentioned, I focus on the supports for scalable tech entrepreneurship. How are you incubating and accelerating and just sparking that opportunity for tech startups? Obviously, those tech startups need capital. So what happens in your ecosystem when people say, I have an idea, who's gonna fund it? Are there pathways to access capital? Are there angel investors? Is there a local fund? Maybe just in the region, if not in your community. What does access to capital look like locally, and how can you build out those pathways, assuming that tech entrepreneurship gets started? Then, of course, you need to train a workforce, right? I have a tech startup. I'm really excited about it. I've got a great product. I need a software engineer to help me build it out. Where can I find them? I want to find somebody local. I don't want to hire somebody in the neighboring big city or somebody remote from insert international country X, right? I want to find somebody local who can have the tech talent that I need on my team so that they can come in and thrive in this company. And then I want other folks as well in the community. Maybe they don't want to work for a tech startup, a little too chaotic, whatever. They might have been trained up in a great tech skill and they want to access a tech job, whether that is a tech job within the local community, like hospitals and other places that have internal needs for technologists and folks who have those skills, or if it's a remote job, right? How do we help people get trained up, access the jobs? Maybe it's with a startup. The startup needs to have capital in order for that to happen. And all of this is underpinned by the fact that it needs to reflect the demographics of your community, right? We actually don't want to create more Silicon Valleys where it's just mostly folks with privilege, folks with historical opportunity to create something new. We want to see it reflective of all the different types of people in the community who may not have seen themselves as tech entrepreneurs before because they haven't ever seen anybody who looks like them or who's from their community or who has an accent like theirs be successful in this arena and in this industry. So that's a really important part to underpin it all, is who has access, how are you building equity and inclusion into all of these programs and resource opportunities. And we believe by doing all of this, putting it together in an interconnected ecosystem way, it will lead to quality tech employment and local wealth creation by startups. And that's what we want to see. So like I mentioned, we've got this network of 33 and growing rural communities across the country that are working on this. We bring them through a process of sort of assessing what kind of opportunities and what kind of gaps their current ecosystem has, help them think about the strategy, the funding, and then they join this community of practice, where we continue to support them really for as long as they're doing this. As long as they want to be a part of our group, we'll help them continue to grow and scale their tech economy. This is a little snapshot of the network. Like I mentioned, the organization was originally, Corey was founded in Vermont, but we are a national nonprofit. We're distributed all across the country. I am absolutely not a Vermonter. It's a beautiful place, but I could never get down with all that snow. So we've got people all over. We're still working on our expansion into the southeast, but SOAR is actually one of our partners. So Eastern Kentucky belongs to the Rural Innovation Network, the SOAR organization, and obviously that's part of what brings me here today, is because I am really inspired by the efforts, though this is a massive region, the efforts to try to spark tech economies and innovation ecosystems all across Eastern Kentucky. And folks like Colby and Josh are in this network and can talk to people, what's happening in Independence, Oregon, how are they doing it in Wilson, North Carolina, and share best practices and learn from each other. What's going on? This is the group that also we helped raise this $29.9 million, 33 communities across 24 states. Overall, altogether, it's a 2.2 million population size. All these little rural communities together make up quite a large city if you were to put them all together. And then this is where I'm proud because it debunks this idea. We often hear from funders in this space, as well as people who practice it every day, that, oh, there's no way tech startups or a tech accelerator can succeed in rural America. That's incorrect, and we have proof, and I'll show you more proof, but 17 incubators and accelerators exist across this network, and that number is growing every day as well as a result of more funding and more opportunity. Like I mentioned too, we have a startup investment fund, and that fund has invested in 9 tech startups that have together raised over $20 million in follow-on investments. So we're seeing the programming happening, we're seeing the investment happening. We know that this is really just the beginning of unleashing a wave of tech entrepreneurship and tech startups in these rural places. And so to kind of bring it all together, I want to show you our model, these building blocks here, this little printout on the table, and give you a couple examples of what we're talking about at these different phases. And how does this look in practice, right? I've talked a lot about the theory of it all, but what does it look like on the ground? So this is the model for our ecosystem approach to supporting scalable tech startups. And I'll go through this kind of phase by phase, but want to show you all together, again, what we believe this model sort of maps up to: jobs and wealth. More tech jobs that create higher salaries, greater opportunities for people, and ideally, again, staying at home. You don't need to move to Chicago or LA or wherever to do this really fast-paced, exciting technology startup opportunity work. So, and I know this is kind of cut off at the bottom here, but to start, phase 0 is what we call the foundation stage. And at the foundation stage, it's where you have mostly Main Street businesses. So we often most of the time meet rural communities here. They say, I don't really know a tech startup. I don't know anybody right now who I could say is really doing tech entrepreneurship. But boy, do I know a lot of entrepreneurs or people who are aspiring entrepreneurs to start a really cool Main Street store, a mom and pop business, a taco truck, whatever it is, right? These sort of non-scalable but really important small businesses that we love. Again, we believe backbone of the American economy. But like I talked about, our focus specifically is on tech startups because we believe they can create more jobs at a higher paying scale. So when we meet communities at this foundation stage, we see them, usually have these kinds of assets, right? A chamber that's focused on entrepreneurship, maybe the small business development center that's really rocking and rolling, and then some programs like some sort of business support for Main Street. Maybe there's a lot of energy around buying local. Maybe there's a startup program, but it's more focused on small business that's around, pitching or other things to highlight Main Street opportunities. This we call the foundation stage because, again, maybe there's not anybody there yet who has a tech startup idea or who thinks that they could be a tech entrepreneur, but this is a place to start to really build upon the existing entrepreneurial energy, right? Even if you think you have nothing, if you have one guy or gal who started something and they have a brick and mortar store and they're working really hard every day, that is an entrepreneur. That's the entrepreneurial spirit that you can really go all in on and then continue to grow from there. Support and highlight that person and then try to get others to realize, hey, Sally's really making it happen for herself on the business and opportunity side of growing this opportunity. So ultimately, what does that mean when we think about this next phase? First, I'll show you some examples was actually in Pikeville. You all know the Co-Starters cohort. It was a great example of an opportunity to bring together, in particular in this case, women, to help them learn the basics of a business. So sort of fundamentals of a business model. How do we think about putting an opportunity to start something really together? What does that look like? What form should that take? You don't have to be a tech startup. You don't have to have an idea even. You could just come into a Co-Starters cohort and get the sort of fundamentals of building a small business. A similar program in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, another rural community that we work with. And it was, again, a creating your business program, start your own small business, kind of a course that people could enroll in. And they were specifically focusing, because Pine Bluff is a place with a majority Black population, they were trying to focus on Black and other people of color founders to come in there and learn, again, about the fundamentals, a sort of 101 of starting a business. Doesn't matter if it's a tech startup, but tech startups are welcome, because this kind of programming is the earliest stage possible to get people interested and get them in the door. And from there, you can start to refer them, if they might have an idea or might start to think more scalable tech, to what we call the parallel path. So what is the parallel path? How do you create that? It's on top of this foundation stage where there's small business. We talk about phase one, the idea stage, where you want to have inspiration, education, and some sort of validation mechanism for future tech entrepreneurs. What is the space that they're going to meet at for co-location and networking? Where can they start to gather their community? Where can they start to meet other like-minded people and see, hey, you know, I'm actually not the only one. Sally's been building her business for 5 years, and Mark down the road, he's been tinkering in his garage, and maybe there's a little something more here than I thought was previously possible. So a space for co-locating, networking, bringing people together to just sort of feed off of each other's energy. We find that really critical at this first sort of idea stage to help people see that there is a culture, a nascent culture, but still a culture of tech entrepreneurship. Obviously then, access to a technically skilled workforce. If I'm starting to tinker with an idea, but I don't really know how to bring it to life, who can I call? Who can help me? There are people, likely in every rural community, that have some experience or even just YouTube education, which is fantastic in this day and age, who can help you kind of think about and tinker with that tech idea. And I'll tell you a little story about a really cool example of that from North Carolina in a moment. And then there's media outlets, right? So how can we raise awareness of the entrepreneurship community? If nobody knows that you're offering these tech startup meetups or that you're offering a sort of 101 on entrepreneurship, if nobody knows that those events and programs are available to them, obviously they're not going to participate. So having some sort of dedicated media outlet that can say, hey, tech community of Pikeville, hey, aspiring entrepreneurs of Hazard, how about y'all come on down at 6 o'clock to the brewery and we're gonna have a informal meetup and we're gonna talk about our ideas and we're gonna talk about what supports you need and just bring people together so that they can be aware of that through some sort of media outlet. So maybe that's a Facebook page, a LinkedIn group, a dedicated part of your organization's website, whatever it is. What are all the different media outlets to raise awareness of the entrepreneurship community? And then how might people connect to ideas? If there is a desire to be a tech entrepreneur, but maybe no tech idea, how could that be solved, right? If somebody wants to do it, it shouldn't stop them just because they're not exactly sure what their product or service or future company might be about. So maybe there's a research arm of a local university or community college that could offer up some ideas. Or maybe there is a local problem set, a couple of different things civically that y'all want to solve, or organizations or tech employers that have some problems who could come together and do what we call a reverse pitch event. Where basically they say, hey, we have this problem at company X, or we have this problem in the city of Pikeville. What kind of solutions would you all come up with? And it's sort of this ideation opportunity for tech entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs to offer ideas and then pitch them back to the very companies that might be interested in being their customers in the future. So there's creative ways, different levers you can pull to try to help people connect to actual ideas that are scalable and tech-focused. It's okay if somebody may not have that. It's part of the program that they could show up and discover something new and then go all in on that tech idea. And again, those programs might take the shape of a entrepreneurship meetup, a sort of how I built this talk. Again, even if it's the local gal who started a coffee shop, she still has a really awesome entrepreneurship story to tell about how she made it work. She saw the vision, she had to talked to XYZ people, and this is where she is now, right? And so even if it's not a tech entrepreneur that you can think of, highlighting the local entrepreneurship and the risk takers in your community and celebrating them is a really great place to start to sort of build this culture of possibility, right? Hey, we want to support folks who are going out on their own and trying new things. We're going to actually still cheer you on even if your first venture fails. That's okay, because we often talk about, too, in rural places, you don't really have the luxury of failure that you do in an urban place, right? In a big city, you're more anonymous. You can try something and it can totally blow up, and then it's almost like celebrated in Silicon Valley. Like, oh, it's cool to fail, 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 fail fast, fail forward. And so folks fail and they try again and they try again, and they're much more likely, statistically, to be successful on their second try. But in a rural place, we often see somebody tries something, it's even successful maybe for a couple years, but then things happen, the tides shift, the economy, whatever, or just other things in their life, and they have to close it down. And then what happens? Community might say, oh, that failed. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, that'll never work here again. No, so-and-so can't do that, or it just doesn't, we don't have the kind of economy or people for it, or whatever. The culture is not one that is necessarily as kind to people taking risks and trying things and failing. So celebrating failure, helping folks know that it's okay to strike out and maybe not get it right the first time, that's a critical part of this sort of inspiration and education. Ideation workshops, like I mentioned, helping people think through an idea, even if they may not have one. A hackathon, like how could we solve the community problem in Pikeville facing our seniors, right? We need tech-based solutions to help seniors feel more connected to their grandkids. Just making something up, but like that's the kind of thing where people could think, oh, maybe we could create a robot that would hold grandma's hand or whatever it is, right? But helping people get together and start thinking through like what solutions could technology help with? The robot one is crazy, so don't quote me on that. But ultimately, how can people start to think like, yeah, maybe I could tinker and hack away and come up with an idea that could actually turn into a startup. So startup weekends are kind of like events that bring people together and help them get inspired and fired up about something is another great way to build this parallel path. You've got lots of programs and opportunities for small business, and you also want to create this opportunity for people who might not yet know that they could become a tech entrepreneur, but the opportunity is there for them, ready and waiting for them to take once they see themselves in it. So some examples we've seen at this stage, again, to inspire. We have this talk series in rural Minnesota in Red Wing, where they found lots of different tech entrepreneurs and small business entrepreneurs from across their rural region, and they scheduled a monthly sort of tech meetup where these entrepreneurs would come and talk about their success and their failure and what keeps them up at night and what they're excited about, and just share with people to kind of debunk, like, it is hard to be an entrepreneur, but here's all the awesome things about it. So they did this talk series, Journey to Starting and Growing a Business was all the sort of storytelling angle. And then in rural Ada, Oklahoma, they did a boot camp teaching both small business owners and aspiring tech entrepreneurs the sort of just basics of how do you think about articulating your pitch, right? A 2-second pitch or 2-minute pitch in an elevator to somebody. How do you really hit the key points of what you're talking about, whether it is starting a coffee shop or starting a software business? Some of those fundamentals are the same. And then this is one of my favorites, just a little north of here, an example of something I think really cool to highlight a unique problem in the community. Portsmouth, Ohio is a place many of you maybe know that has been extremely hard hit. It was one of the worst in the country to be impacted by the opioid epidemic. Lots of people dealing with that, dealing with addiction. And so there was lots of resources around recovery for folks. And one such resource that they created was actually an Entrepreneurship in Recovery program. So for people in recovery or who have come out through and made it to the other side, have started entrepreneurship ventures, they can talk about that and inspire other people who might be in it or getting through it that, hey, you can do this. Just because you might have been through something really challenging, we know that there's an opportunity on the other side for you to become an entrepreneur, for you to become a tech worker. And so they did this speaker series from folks in recovery themselves or through recovery to talk about their entrepreneurship journey. And then they also started to host specific events like startup boot camps for the recovery community. They hired somebody from the recovery community himself who knew a lot of people. He was well networked in that space. And then he could do a lot of personal outreach. Hey, Jim, I know, you've been talking about maybe a business or a new opportunity for a while now. Why don't you come on down to the boot camp we're going to have for folks just like you? So really cool sort of phase one idea, inspiration, just building that culture of possibility for people in their community who specifically have this challenge, but it's a huge part of their community. So again, trying to create things that are reflective of the demographics of the community. And this is a really just quick example of some more co-working spaces across our network. In Taos, New Mexico, they have the Taos Hive, which is partnered with the University of New Mexico, where they offer some satellite courses and some other opportunities. Like they actually, in Taos, just won Build to Scale, this EDA grant, $1.5 million, where they're going to build out a accelerator here. Actually, very excited to tell you, Portsmouth, who I just talked about, also just won a Build to Scale. So they also are receiving $1.5 million to build out more of these programming opportunities for the recovery community, as well as a tech startup accelerator, because Shawnee State in Portsmouth, you would never think it, but has a top 10 nationally ranked game development program. So helping people design and develop video games, and they are investing into that to help more rural folks become leaders in the gaming industry. In Wilson, North Carolina, there's a very cool opportunity, or a cool co-working space called the Gig East Exchange. It has a digital skilling boot camp from Microsoft. It has a Riot, it's called RIoT, the sort of Raleigh Innovation, or Raleigh Internet of Things was originally what that stood for, but then they just took it into like, it's a Riot, Chaos, Startups Accelerator program. It's a spoke from a hub in Raleigh, North Carolina. So Raleigh, lots of opportunity, lots of tech entrepreneurship happening in that triangle area. And they said, we want a little bit more of a rural presence. Could we have a person from our office and all of our accelerator programming go over and live in your community, in your program? And so you can run an accelerator, same quality, same speakers, same everything that we do in Raleigh, but over here an hour away in Wilson. And that has been a really cool example of success for them. They've helped both small business entrepreneurs, a natural hair care company, as well as a software company started by a guy named Marcus. And Marcus worked in the auto industry. He was a repairman, and that had been his career for decades, right? He worked on fixing cars, and he had to deal with customers a lot. And he saw that the customer experience, as we all know, going into an auto shop, sometimes leaves a little something to be desired, right? You're like, where is my car in the chain of getting fixed, and how much time is it gonna take me, and how long am I gonna have to sit here? And he just sort of realized the customer experience at the auto shop was leaving something to be desired, right? And so he went on Facebook and he said, I have an idea. I think that we could solve the customer experience problem at the auto shop with some kind of software, like some kind of dashboard to show you where your car is. And maybe it texts you and says, hey, your car's gonna be done in 15 minutes. You can come on back, or whatever. There's some tech solution here. I don't know how to build it, right? I'm a guy who's been in the repair shop for 25 years, so do I know anybody who knows anything about programming? He just wrote this on Facebook. Anybody out there? And one of his customers actually said, yeah, I'm a software engineer. How can I help you? You wanna get together? So they met up over coffee, and they started talking about what this idea could be. And then a couple years later, fast forward, that company has been so successful, they're now valued as an organization, as a private company, as $30 million. They've raised from our fund, as well as other funds, millions of dollars to grow their team. And they have a brick and mortar store, even though they are a software business. They have a brick and mortar store in downtown Wilson, where lots of their folks come and work from that store. And they continue to make visible, hey, this is what we can do. Marcus was a guy who worked in an auto shop. He had never taken any kind of coding boot camp or startup class in his life, but he had an idea, he threw it out there, the community responded, he worked together, him and his co-founder, they went through this accelerator program, and that is how they've been able to scale and reach their success. As obviously Marcus left the auto repair shop and is a full-time CEO now of this tech startup. It's called Shift Auto, S-H-Y-F-T. Auto, if y'all wanna look it up later. I'm really proud of that story because I think it shows, kind of flips on its head this idea that everybody who starts a tech startup has to be like a MIT tech entrepreneur who's done 3 different startups and knows how to code and knows all of the technicalities of scaling and creating software, right? Marcus didn't know any of that, but he knew his industry really well. He said, I see a problem here. I know that technology in some way can solve it. Let's work together, tech community and me, to figure it out. And that has been so successful. So very cool example in Wilson. Similarly, Cape Girardeau, that's one of the most mature communities that we see. In southeastern Missouri, they have a 17,000 square foot co-working space. Now they've been at this for about 7 years now. They won one of the first EDA's I-6 or Build to Scale grants to start this innovation hub where they have a thriving co-working space, a free digital skilling program for adults that teaches you front-end and back-end engineering. And they also funnel those graduates into a project shop. So if you are a local business, a tech startup, anybody in between, and you have a tech problem, you can come to Codify and have the graduates of their digital skilling program work with you and solve whatever tech solution you need. They also have a youth coding program. It's called Youth Coding Labs, and it is within, or the Youth Coding League, it's within schools. It's kind of like a gamified, like sports, making it more like sports where they get little jerseys and they're in the basketball stadium, but they're coding against each other. And then they have a startup program, it's called First 50K, where they incentivize people to move to Cape Girardeau by paying them or giving them $50,000 as an investment into their company. Obviously, it's gated, so you don't get the first $50,000 just by day one, but over the course of 2 years, if you stay there and you continue to build out your startup, you get $50,000 and obviously connection into this community. So co-working space opportunities, getting to meet mentors and investors and the like, and they have really grown a startup ecosystem by attracting people not really from like New York or Chicago, but in southeastern Missouri, an easier get to bring people from St. Louis, right? Or people who are maybe from Cape Girardeau. One guy actually was living in Los Angeles, but he's from Cape Girardeau and wanted to go back there, and the First 50K program was the push that he needed to bring his tech startup back home. And this is that model for an innovation hub that we talk about, so underpinned by some sort of higher education partner, broadband, and capital. The taco truck is a nod to the small businesses that we love. But that inside here, maybe there's, first floor coffee shop, art, culture, amenities, something to bring you in. Second floor, an accelerator for startups, some co-working space, maybe open desks and incubation services to help you bring that idea to life. And maybe over here, there's some training opportunities. So coding, whatever we've sort of determined the community might benefit the most from in terms of digital jobs or the future of work. What are the demands from local tech employers, or what are the demands from the aspiring startups, and how do we ensure that the skilling opportunities are matching those demands? And then on top, maybe some cool lofts or other things to offer the entrepreneurs that might be working from this space that want to live there. And this is just a quick overview if y'all are thinking about a co-working space or an incubator or an accelerator, what's the difference? How do all of these kind of work together or intersect? And so just per the EDA, incubator, a multi-tenant facility, provides young or startup businesses with space, support services, and business assistance. So an incubator may have all these things, office space, resources, advisory, and mentorship. Co-working space might have all of that, but usually not like a specific business support center or entrepreneurship support. And then an accelerator probably doesn't have office space. It's maybe just a program run from wherever. And it's more about focusing on the dedicated kind of support and resources and oftentimes funding that a startup needs to really run. I say that an incubator, you think about chickens. An incubator is where the little eggs get all the warmth and love that they need so that they can hatch. So incubators really help the startups hatch. And an accelerator is like throwing a fox into the chicken pen. All the chickens got to learn how to run real quick. The accelerator teaches them to run, teaches them to grow. And so I say this because I think incubators and accelerators are used interchangeably. And I would personally like to see that stop, right? We got to think about incubators being a little more early stage ideation support to grow, and accelerators being those programs that help you run. And why does this matter? Because at the launch stage, you see we're all the way up here now, where entrepreneurs can establish and formalize their ventures. They can do that in an incubator, then in an accelerator, then a pitch event. Usually pitch events are the sort of culminating thing at the end of an accelerator. There's a demo day where you pitch to investors, you pitch to your friends, your family, and everybody says, yeah, nice work, we love your pitch. And then resources for starting up, so HR, legal, finance, mentors, and access to tech talent. Again, how can you get all these things at launch stage? You've spent some time as a community building up the foundation, things for small businesses, things to help people know, hey, there's a culture, there's groups here that want to see you succeed. Then, the idea stage, hey, there's inspiration, there's opportunities to validate and test your idea and tinker with things. Then you're ready to incubate, accelerate, pitch, find your first, finance person, or hire your first person through HR services, or find a great mentor. That's all the way up here. And I'm stressing this because a lot of rural leaders come to me, watch a decent amount of Shark Tank, and they're like, Molly, I want to start a pitch event. I'm like, that's awesome, Jim. Who do you know that's ready to pitch? He's like, I don't know. I don't know anybody right now. I don't know a single tech entrepreneur who I could put on a stage who would succeed at this juncture. And I said, all right, so what makes you think a pitch event is the right thing to do, right? Why are we starting all the way up here? Or I want an accelerator. I've heard about Y Combinator. I want to do that too. Well, that's fantastic. But before you can get to this point, as we've seen now, quite a bit of work has to happen here for people to even step into the ecosystem and know that it's possible for them. So don't start with the pitch event or the accelerator. Start to build that pipeline and build up the groundswell so that you know there will be demand for an accelerator and a pitch event when that time comes in your community. So like I mentioned, the assets in this phase, an incubator focused on educating and creating those tech startups, operational resources, a talent pool for startups to grow, mentors, an accelerator to help them really get investor ready, and again, connections to all the kinds of folks that they might need to help them scale. So what this looks like in rural, North Iowa, they partnered with MIT. It's called the MIT Venture Mentoring Service, where MIT will come in and train up individuals in your community who might want to become mentors but have never had that opportunity before, because mentorship can be a pretty delicate thing to get right. And so helping them understand how to mentor tech startups, they partnered with MIT to do that, to offer that program in the accelerator that they run through the community college. And then Startup Shenandoah Valley, they also won Build to Scale. And with the Build to Scale funding, they started this incubator, accelerator sort of hybrid program where they give every entrepreneur who participates in the program a coach who creates sort of a custom learning plan for them. So I think you need to validate your business model. I think you need to go talk to 15 customers. Then I think you need to prototype XYZ. And so those coaches work individually, virtually, with all these different entrepreneurs because the Shenandoah Valley is a pretty wide, vast rural region, probably very similar to Eastern Kentucky in some of those ways, where there's a community over here, and then hour and a half through the valley, there's another community over here. And so they want to bring them together virtually, offering them services, and then do different, in Harrisonburg, in Stanton, we'll do these meetups across the valley for people to come together, get out of their house, meet each other, network at a brewery, celebrate the end of their cohort, for example. But they did that, to meet the needs of the region, acknowledging that there were some people who were more incubation stage and some people who were more accelerator ready. So they did this hybrid, really custom program. And that leads you all the way to the end to scale and help startups expand, help them find investors and funding pathways. All the way at this phase is where they're really growing. Startups are enabled to prove their value and connect with funding and resources. So this is where maybe there's some high net worth individuals in the community who, like in Oklahoma, for example, folks are more used to investing in real estate or in oil and gas. But folks have the net worth where they could be accredited investors. They may just have never gotten the opportunity or the invitation to learn how to invest in startups. So with the, again, funding that they won through the Build to Scale, Ada, Oklahoma is hiring a investor relations associate, which is just a fancy way of saying they're having a full staff member dedicated to going out and networking with the high net worth folks in the community who have been investors in previous things before, but maybe never a tech startup. And they're trying to give them the tools and the training and the education for how they can become angel investors in the future. They're sort of laying the groundwork for a future angel fund. Similarly, other places are doing that. I'll give you some examples in a moment. But what does this look like at this phase? An angel investor network, venture capital fund, mentors who have experience in fundraising. So we also offer a mentor network for our communities. If you don't have somebody in your local community who's ever raised venture capital or worked at the intersection of healthcare and artificial intelligence, we put together this mentor network with mentors from, major cities and from rural places who have really specific tech skills or startup experience, and they can come in virtually and support a rural entrepreneur in those kinds of verticals or areas where they might not be able to find it locally. So finding those mentors, people with focused expertise, finding maybe even a program to help you after the accelerator. So there's this concept called the Valley of Death, where a startup graduates from an accelerator and then they haven't yet found the funding. They haven't found an investor. They haven't figured out how they're going to be profitable. And so the valley is sometimes where they die, where the business fails, because they haven't figured out how are we going to make this work in the very short amount of time that startups often have, given how challenging it is, right? And so how can you help them continue on their way? Workshops to help them maybe access other kinds of capital, non-dilutive capital, like SBIR grants or other kinds of grant opportunities, or a program that makes introductions, right? So startups can find the customers that they want. We used to say in the accelerator, the most important thing for startups were the 3 C's: customers, connections, and capital. Are you providing introductions to key customers or people who could become customers? Are you making other valuable connections with mentors or maybe their future employers or employees? And are you providing either pathways or exactly itself capital deployment? So can you figure out ways to give them the funds that they need? And a way that we've seen that again, I talked about the first 50K program where it's an incentive for startups. They get $50,000, but they also have some relationships with some great folks in the community. And they had a fintech or financial tech startup come and join the program through the incentive. And the financial tech startup wanted to meet with a big bank. And the biggest bank in southeastern Missouri, or in the whole state, happened to be on the board. So the president of the bank was on the board of the organization, Codify as well, in Cape Girardeau. And so they were able to make that connection, say, hey, you're a financial tech startup, you want to talk to banks? We happen to be connected to an awesome, massive regional bank. Here's that introduction. And that is an incredible customer opportunity to build that out. Same with the group in Traverse City, Michigan. Again, they leveraged the high net worth individuals there to turn them into angel investors. And they were able to deploy some capital into the Traverse City, Michigan startups. So all of this comes together at the top here. Startups are receiving investments, they're hiring locally, they're creating more jobs and more wealth. And this is where you come in. So I will pause. I know I went through some of that quickly and it was a lot of content to throw at you, but I tried to go through each of these stages so that y'all can have a good understanding of what exists, what do each of these sort of blocks look like. And I'm curious what this would look like in your community. What currently exists, and what do you think should exist that doesn't yet? So doing a little mapping of this at every stage, thinking about your ecosystem or your community. So you can take one of these, write your community or your ecosystem's name on it, and then start to map in each block a sticky per asset, or a couple since this is kind of small. What does your community already have at this stage? And then what, maybe different color or shape, or just like make a star for what are the things that you would actually like to offer in the future in your ecosystem. So maybe you don't have a mentor network, but you think you've got a lot of people who are from the university or from a local tech company who might be interested in being mentors if they knew that there was an opportunity to get plugged into entrepreneurs. So that could be one thing, or maybe you don't have any sort of like inspiration or culture building. There's no speaker series, there's no meetups, there's nothing to get people excited about this. So what does that look like, and how do we do that? And so that is the task at hand for y'all now, and I'm not sure who belongs to which communities or if this will make sense for you all, but I'm happy to take any questions or just chat further about this. But this is the plan for our remaining time here, is I would love to hear about your ecosystems, have y'all do some mapping, and then if you'd be willing, can come around, or we can do it as a group and just share what you found and what it looks like and what you might be interested in building.